The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
Okay, so today's topic is going to be biogas digesters. So our objectives for the class or this session are going to be to learn how biogas digesters work, when and where they're appropriate, some important design considerations when you're building biogas digesters, and then we're going to build a small-scale one in lab. So you get to play with some of the stuff. Oops, I slipped slides. So these are some pictures of biogas digesters. They've been around for a couple hundred years, or maybe 150 years. There are lots of different forms for them. As you can see, they scale up. They can be anywhere from large industrial ones like that one, or they can be smaller scale ones for just a single farmer or single family. And what is a biogas digester is a question that you may be asking. So a biogas digester is something that takes organic matter, normally animal, human, vegetable waste, and turns it into gas for cooking, and also turns it into fertilizer for crops. So it's basically taking organic matter and putting it through a process, and you get gas and fertilizer from that. The process that breaks down the organic matter is anaerobic digestion. So you have bacteria which are found in the organic waste, and when you put them under anaerobic conditions, which means that they're not exposed to oxygen, they break down all the organic waste and form methane gas and carbon dioxide, and so you basically have a giant chamber, I guess, and in this chamber you have your waste here with your bacteria in it, and you let it sit for a while. It takes about 2 weeks for them to start working once you get them going, and they break down the organic matter in here and produce gas. And you normally have an inlet and an outlet. And what happens is you put in more organic matter through the inlet, and it pushes out some of this slurry or whatever's left over, and so you get fertilizer from this end. And the entire time you're producing gas, which you can extract from there. So about biogas. The composition of biogas is mostly methane and carbon dioxide. So you have about 60% methane, about 40% carbon dioxide, and then there are trace amounts of nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and oxygen. And yeah, and the amount of energy you can extract from biogas is 20 megajoules per cubic meter. Which is a fair bit, yes.
How does that 20 megajoules compare to, say, diesel or traditional fossil fuel?
I'm not exactly sure right now. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that. I had a chart with how it compares to how it can light things, but I didn't put it on here because, yeah. And so the parts of the biogas digester are kind of like what I drew here, but better in this picture. You have a trench where you put the biogas digester. You have the biogas digester bag, which is what contains all of the manure and the slurry and the gas. Then you have your inlet and outlet, and you have a security valve, and you have a gas reservoir as well. So we're gonna talk a little bit now about why you would have a biogas digester, what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages. So now that you've learned a little bit about it, we can brainstorm some ideas about why you would use it or where you would use it. Yeah. You add water to it to make a slurry. So you mix manure and water, and you get the slurry, and then you put it into the system. You guys will be doing that later today too. So I went to a farm and got some fresh cow manure for you to work with. So yeah, yeah.
What are the typical sizes of
If you want a ballpark size, I guess would be maybe like 10 or 15 feet. Does that seem right? 15 feet long, maybe like this size diameter. Like the trench would be kind of like this corridor between the two tables. That's about the size that you're looking at. For like a family, a household one. But they can range from like small to large as well. So if you look at this, there's actually a lot of design that went into the specific biogas digester. And so we can look at the individual components of it and figure out why, and try to look through the design process and thought process that they used to come up with this design, because this is actually a pretty clever design for a biogas digester. So does anyone notice anything about this diagram that seems like a good idea for them to have done? Yeah, the security valve is important. You don't want your thing blowing up. Yeah, reservoir is also good because with this, because storing gas is also somewhat of a problem, and if you don't have access, like if you don't have a place to store the gas and access it pretty easily, then you're not going to have, yeah. Can you guys think about the fence? I don't know if you can see it in there, but there's a fence around this specific design. And the problem, like one of the things with this design is that the bag, the biogas digester bag for this it's a big plastic bag that's covered in tarp that's sewn together. And so you have this sort of like giant plastic bag that's sitting outside. And one of the cool things about it is it's really cheap because you don't have to build an external construction for it, but it's also, like if you have cattle, which a lot of times you will have for something like this, and your cow steps on this bag, it's pretty much ruined. You're ruining your like $300 biogas digester. So that's why they put a fence there. Can you think of other advantages to having a bag other than just the fact that it's cheaper? Yes. It's not really transportable, but
Like if you had to move location and move out of your house and take it with you?
you can't really move. Well, maybe it's easier to transport to the site you're installing to, so you can make one of these and I guess transport them to the location. I haven't actually seen that done. I've seen most of them being installed on site from the raw materials, but it's definitely easier to get a large plastic bag than it is to get all like of the bricks you would need to build a giant biogas digester and seal it. Yeah.
Since you want to be able to control the seal on it, but since you have a bag, the volume can actually change. Even though it doesn't create a vacuum, I guess.
Yeah.
The volume changes.
So that's actually a pretty cool thing about this design is your bag can get bigger and smaller depending on how much gas is being produced. Because say if you have a rigid structure, kind of like, okay. So you have, I'm just going to redraw what I just had. So you have a box, right? And say it's made out of bricks. You somehow manage to seal it from the inside so there's no air loss or gas loss, which isn't trivial for one. But you manage to do that, and you put biogas in here, and it's filling up, and it's producing methane, or I guess it's producing biogas. What happens as you produce more and more gas in this sort of design? You start getting a pressure buildup of gas in here, And if you're outputting it into, say, a stove here, if you're outputting it into a stove there, depending on what the pressure is of the biogas in this chamber, you're going to get a fluctuation in your stove temperature or your flame front, which is kind of annoying and tricky to work with. So if you have something that expands like a bag, it's better, like you'll have more of a constant pressure. There are some other designs that also try to regulate the temperature, or not the temperature, the volume of the chamber for the gas. There's one called a floating dome one, which is actually what you'll be making. And what it is you have a giant thing here. You have your container, which is solid in this case. You have your slurry here, and then you have a dome like this that has your pipe coming out. And what happens is this can move up and down inside of your chamber. And so as you produce more methane gas, or biogas rather, as the pressure builds up, it pushes up on the dome. So you're creating more of a space and regulating pressure with the size of the chamber, which is a pretty cool design. And the ones you guys are going to be making are kind of similar to this, but somewhat of an adaptation. You're going to take the bottom of a Coke bottle. It's kind of like that, and then you're going to fill it with water, and you're going to have one biogas chamber. You're going to have your chamber with slurry, and then you're going to have a valve coming into here and coming out of the water and going up into that chamber. So this will be able to move based on how much gas you have in there. Can you guys think of any other advantages to having this sort of design? Other than being able to regulate a constant amount? So how would I know how much methane or biogas I'm going to have in this chamber with this design? I would have to put basically a pressure valve on here and read pressure, which is kind of annoying and expensive, and yeah, and it's not really like easy to get a pressure valve in a lot of places. But with a design like this, if you let it float, you can measure just the height of this chamber, because the higher the chamber, the more volume of biogas you have. So it's almost like an indicator that tells you how much you have as well, which is also pretty cool. But I've talked a lot about how biogas digesters work in sort of the design sense, but we haven't really got into why they're used or where they would be applicable. So let's think about some of when what are the advantages of biogas to other alternative cooking fuels. We can start by naming other sources of fuel. Someone want to throw out other sources of fuel that people use? Do you have charcoal? You have wood. Anyone seen other techniques that they use? Natural gas. I've seen in other parts of the world, people actually just burn manure straight. You also have electricity.
Biogas comes from manure, though.
Yeah.
Biogas is the fuel, or manure is the fuel, but like how is manure fuel without any processing?
In places they just take like cow dung and just burn it as a fuel source. They just take it and burn it, and then you cook your food over it.
Well, then what is the wood burning, or like how do they burn it with?
drying out.
So yeah, you let it sit out in the sun, it dries out, it forms sort of a briquette, and you can just burn this briquette, and then it produces. I mean, it releases energy when you burn it. Yeah, it gives off a lot of bad smoke, bad smell too. And the other thing about burning manure directly is that it's kind of taking a product that's very rich in like resources. Like there's a lot of organic matter in there that could be used as fertilizer, and instead of using the like these good properties of that, you're just combusting it, and so it's a waste of resources basically to burn manure directly. All right, what about wood and charcoal? What are disadvantages of that? Yeah.
Besides where you're using the DLAB method of using agricultural waste to make charcoal, it's leads to deforestation of the landscape.
Okay. That's definitely a big concern. Like, if you look at Haiti, so much of Haiti is deforested. And in places where you don't have access to, like if you, like in a lot of parts of, I guess, India and Nepal, you'll have areas that are heavily deforested already, and so they don't have access to wood and charcoal even, and charcoal is expensive there. And in places like that where people are farmers or cattle farmers, a technology like biogas digesters makes sense. Any other disadvantages to wood, maybe? Have you ever tried what?
Collection time. It's hard to keep it good, dry.
Just as a sense, have any of you been to developing world places where you've seen people cook on 3 stone wood fires or anything like that? What did you notice about the cooking process?
Pretty inefficient.
Do you want to tell people about how they cooked there?
Well, it was my aunt's house, and it was. I mean, it's just hard to come up. It's just hard to get. So a lot of times they just don't cook, and they end up just not being able to cook.
Okay. When they did cook, what was the process that they used for cooking with the fire or with the wood? Because it varies depending on where you are. There are like a lot of different ways of combusting wood and using it in the stove. What did the stove look like?
I was like a lot younger. This was like maybe 6 years ago, so I think it was just like lighting the wood and putting the pot first and burning.
Okay. You
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're getting at.
like
Sorry. Either, sorry.
yeah. Okay. Well,
It's just like hard to regulate the temperature. You have to keep feeding wood to it to keep it burning.
yeah, and I mean, like one of the biggest problems with it is also just the smoke that it releases and the fumes from that, which are both pretty bad. Like wood fires cause a lot of pollution, and most people cook with wood fires inside their houses, and indoor air pollution is a really big problem throughout the developing world. And so biogas has the advantage where it doesn't release any of these toxic fumes. Yeah.
People complain about taste of the biogas. I'm not saying that like, but I know, so I'm from Colombia and people cook a lot on wood just for the taste, just say it tastes better. So is that like a drawback? That maybe it doesn't give the same taste of wood as an open fire.
Or is it even better?
Yeah, or I mean, it could be better. I don't know. Is that a concern at all?
I haven't seen. Have you seen that concern? I think the way a lot of people I've seen use. How are you talking about them using the wood? Are you talking about them like barbecuing something or grilling?
No, so what I remember it was just putting the wood and then one of those giant pots, what are they called? And then they cook used to make it basically, but then so.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with that, so sorry, can't help. Do you?
But I mean, I think definitely like it is a behavioral change.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of it has to do with what type of stove they're using too. With this biogas, you have to have like a, like gas stoves.
Yeah.
You have to have that sort of way. So I don't know. I know that that's some problem that they have in terms of cooking different.
Okay. What about natural gas? What are some of the problems associated with natural gas? Yes.
it's expensive and it's non-sustainable. Like unless it's produced locally in your area, you have to basically have it shipped in.
You also need the lines to connect to.
So it could be kind of dangerous.
It's, I don't know, I don't think of it as particularly dangerous. It's just you need a lot of infrastructure to be able to provide natural gas to people, and some places it's available and not too bad. Like when I was working in a favela in Brazil over this IAP, they had a truck come in with natural gas or LPG, and they would bring it every couple days and at the same time and pick up old containers and give people new containers for a certain price. And that seemed like it was great, but you can't really have that same sort of infrastructure in a more rural place, for example. Manure we already talked about, and electricity is, I mean, in places, people don't really cook with electricity that much in the developing world, like that I've seen. So yeah, biogas has a lot of advantages in to these other cooking methods, but it also requires certain things. You need you basically need a lot of manure or waste to go into this biogas digester every day. I think the minimum recommendations are having maybe 2 cows or something like that, or a few pigs. And if you don't sort of meet these conditions, you're not going to be able to have a biogas digester that produces that much fuel for you to cook off of, and the investment for building one isn't paid back over a reasonable period of time. The other thing that's cool about biogas is that when you pass your, I think if you're not using human waste, if you're using manure and you're using agricultural waste, or an organic waste, if you pass it through the biogas digester at the end of it, you get fertilizer, which is really good because you're taking a waste product right now, which is animal waste, and it smells bad, and people try to dispose of it as in ways where they're not utilizing any value from it, and you're getting value from this product, which is trash right now, which is a really cool idea. Plus, when you pass the waste through the biogas digester, a lot of the harmful bacteria get killed off in the process of producing, or like when it goes into anaerobic conditions, a lot of the harmful bacteria get killed off. So what you're left with is good fertilizer that you can use to grow crops with, and yeah. So it's really just taking a waste product and getting value from there. What are some of the problems you can see with biogas digesters based off of this cursory introduction to them? Yeah. Yeah. Biogas digesters cost about, or I think the cheapest ones I've seen are around $300 to build. But they're on the order of hundreds of dollars. And so that's pretty expensive to shell out at once to build one of these. Another big thing, again, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was going to say maintaining it, like having to put manure in every day or a week, and then take out the fertilizer.
Yeah. The maintenance costs are pretty big as well. And the problem with this is there's so many parts as well that are very critical to the functionality of it that if one of them breaks, you have to fix it. Otherwise, your entire thing stops. Like if your bag gets a hole in it, all of your gas is going to leak out. So you have to carefully design it and make it so that, and you have to really take care of this, because if you don't, then it's just not going to work anymore. There are a few things that in particular go, or there are some common sources of problems that you're gonna that biogas digesters have over time, and those are just leaks, temperature, and pH. So last year we did this lab in D-Lab Energy as well, where we made biogas digesters, and none of them produced any methane gas or biogas, and it was because last year, unlike this year, D-Lab was very, very cold. It was like you needed to wear jackets around, or you just wouldn't be able to walk around here. And biogas digesters need a warm temperature. I think around 50 degrees Celsius. Though that seems high now. No, that seems high. I'll get back to you on the temperature, but they have a pretty high operational temperature, and if they're in that range, then they work well, and if they're not in that range, they don't work well. So if you're in an area that gets cold a lot or has like huge temperature shifts, then your bacteria that are producing methane under anaerobic conditions are going to die out because of the cold, and you might have to come up with some sort of heating device for your biogas digester to keep it warm. The last thing is pH. You really need, for these bacteria to survive, you need to have them at around a pH that's like around 7. So I think 6 to 8 is reasonable. And if your pH drops below that or gets raised above that, then you also have problems with biogas digesters working. So yeah, I guess that's pretty much all I had prepared for the biogas, just like for the lecture-y part of this. So do you have any questions? Yes.
Are the bacteria introduced, or are they just?
No, they're found. I mean, the bacteria that are in the biogas digesters are the same bacteria that are going to be in your stomach or cow stomachs, and yeah, so they're just introduced. Or not introduced, they're just found in the manure.
So for the slurry that comes out,
Mm-hmm.
can that be used directly as fertilizer, or does it have to be composted?
Uh,
Because I know when you use human waste, you do have to compost it.
So it needs to be separated at least, because there's sort of like the liquid part and the hard part, or like there's the liquid part and the solid matter part, and the solid matter part is generally composted, and the liquid part is used as fertilizer. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you usually like collect cow manure? Like, do they actually put like a diaper thing on the cow, or like what do they do? I don't actually know how that works.
I think they just scoop it up afterwards. Yeah.
This seems like less easy. Like horses are easier because of the way that they're kept. But cows usually just like kept in the field, and it's usually harder to do that.
I think they're usually tied up though.
Okay.
So sometimes.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, but it's you don't put a diaper on a cow generally. I don't think I've ever seen that actually, but you just collect it off the ground.
Wondering about the controls of the design of the biodigester. What like the valves? You mentioned that the security valve was really important. I'm sure there's a valve like right before the stove, right, where you can like turn it on or off.
Yeah.
And so there must be like that gas reservoir is like the gas that you've already produced, right? Like what you're not using, but it's like pressure buildup there. So then if there's a pressure buildup there, but I'm not sure what the functions of the main valve and the security valve and the gas reservoir are, and why if those three are in place, there would be an issue that the pressure would expand because it would just go to the gas reservoir, and the bag wouldn't need to like be able to expand and contract.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think there are other designs of biogas digesters that don't have all of these security things necessarily built into them as well. This is a design that Victor presented. I don't know if you know Victor, but he's one of the D-Lab instructors. And so this was one of the designs that he presented, and so I don't know the specifics about the different valves, but I can find out for you and get back to you next week.
Do you know what the security valve does?
Yeah, it regulates. It makes it so that if there's too much of a buildup of gas, that the gas can escape somewhere, and you don't just have pipes like shooting off because of high pressure. Does that make sense?
I guess it's also don't know what the main valve is, but I guess we can talk.
So you have your security valve here. So that chamber, right, is going to get bigger. Okay, so you have your bag here, then you have your thing going out to security valve here, and then you have your main valve here. And so when your main valve is off, this is sort of a closed system, and so no gas can escape out of this. Like, because you have, like, this is filled up to here, or I'm drawing this wrong, but so you'll normally have like, okay, so you normally have like your sewage level something like this, and so your gas is all your gas is contained within like this region of your biogas digester right now. And so if this valve is off and you keep producing more and more gas, your bag is going to get bigger and bigger, and at some point it's just going to explode because of the excess methane gas. And so what the security valve does is it'll let out that excess gas to prevent your system from breaking.
Is that main valve the one that the person can control, like when they want some cooking, or is there another valve or like switch at the stove?
Generally there's a second switch at the stove end too, right?
The security valve is all passive. Like you don't have to like turn it on or off.
So then
It's
what's
just
the main valve for? Have, like why would you turn it off?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about the specific design. Yeah, out, yeah.
So when there's too much coming from one side or the other, it's just like.
But the other thing is you also don't want to have a fully like open system, like one full closed system, because if there's like a spark or something like that, the entire thing's just gonna blow up, and you don't.
Like prevent the reservoir from also like that.
Is the gas reservoir usually any particular, or is it just a space to keep it, or does it have to be kept under pressure? I guess that's kind of going with is there a second valve?
I've seen lots of different types of gas reservoirs. I think the cheapest one you can do is you can just take another second smaller bag and seal it, and then put an inlet and an outlet on that, and then this bag just fills up and expands as I get, yeah.
Can you compress biogas? And if so, like, how do people do it in developing countries? I mean, it's building under question. Like, do people compress it and then, like, you have, like, cylinders of compressed biogas? Or is it possible to do that? Or does it have to be, like, as biogas, like, in its original?
I'm pretty sure it is possible to do that, but it's a pretty like sophisticated process, and I've never seen it done on like in the actual like in rural developing world. I've only seen it done or heard of it being done in like on the industrial scale.
I'm pretty sure it's pretty hard to compress it.
Compress
Like
it?
normally,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's just because of the different. There's so many different kinds of gas that they start reacting.
Yeah, that's
with
why I
pressure. So it's a lot. It's harder.
Is there an advantage to having gas reservoir, or I don't know if it's actually like outlet for the drawing there, having the gas reservoir, like a supply of gas closer to where the stove is that your digester might be?
Um,
Like physical.
I'm trying to think. I mean, there's probably the user end of it where if you see the reservoir, it's easier to know how full it is and things like that. It's also a second part that needs to be protected if you're using a bag to make it. And so if you're leaving it outdoors, like right next to your biogas digester, maybe it's more likely to get damaged. And if you're putting this inside your house or something like that, or in like a more protected area, that would make it easier. But yeah. If you have so Victor is actually like really experienced with biogas digesters. So if we have more questions, we can have him come in and talk a little bit about it if we have time. And if you guys are doing a biogas project for your specific projects or related to it, then you should also talk to Victor about it to get more information. And so I'm trying to give you more of a general idea of how they work and what things to take into consideration when building one or looking at an existing design, and not, I mean, yeah, more so than like a very in-depth thing, because there are people in D-Lab who know a lot more about biogas digesters than I do. So I guess if there are no other questions, before we go down, I'm going to go through the muddy card questions from last week's lab. Most of the questions were all about the guts of how a PV panel works and photovoltaics work. Yeah, we're gonna do a solar cell lab next week, and the first half of that is just gonna be talking to you about how PV systems work. So you guys can wait another week for that, and you'll have it presented to you. And then one person asked about why you shouldn't spot weld galvanized steel. And when anything's galvanized, what you're doing is you're coating it with zinc so that it doesn't rust. And when you try to weld anything with zinc coatings on it, you vaporize the zinc coating, and it's pretty toxic to you. So if you're doing it in a really well ventilated area, or you're doing it outdoors, it's not a big deal. But if you're doing it indoors, it's toxic. So you want to make sure you avoid welding galvanized materials. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break up into two groups. Well, first off, we're going to be building 5 biogas digesters, little modules. So you should group up into groups of 2 or 3 until we get 5 of them. So let's just do 2. Let's do 4 biogas digester things today. So we'll break up into groups of 3s and 4, and then 2 of those groups are going to go with Becca, and she's going to teach you about plastic sealing and how to make biogas digester slurry from manure and water. And the other group is going to go with me, and I'll walk you through building cutting the wood and putting it together to build the biogas digester.